Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another On the Sports Lines. My name is Stephen Rabinowitz. There's Jay Kaplan, if I don't know if it's the exact way that I'm going, and Anthony Strait is up there. At least that's how I see it. And we will start again, as we do every week now. The last 2 weeks. So if it's 2 weeks, it's every week. That's the trend. With the opener, a topic that has been making headlines in the past week. And we go to the NFL, who have been looking for ways to expand the Rooney Rule, which requires teams to interview one minority head coach for vacant coaching positions. Owners did decide to double that requirement to two minority candidates for head coaching positions, and brought that to assistant coaching positions well, as you can interview one minority. You have to interview one minority head candidate. It's a big help because there's, two minority assistant coaches in all of the NFL, and one of them should be a head coach right now in their academy. But the NFL was also floating around an idea to incentivize hiring minority head coaches by improving their next third-round pick by 6 spots if they hire one, and up to 10 spots if they hire a minority general manager. This idea, which we were about to discuss, was widely panned by everybody and their mother, and this did not move forward. Let's put our figurative owner caps on and ask the simple question: how can more minority head coaches be hired in the NFL? Let's start with the 37-year-old birthday boy, Mr. Anthony.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, man.
Thank you. I'm trying to make 37 cool again. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, but I'll try. I've been racking my brain on how to even come up with a solution, because I think we can all admit that this Rooney Rule, while it had good intentions, have literally done the exact opposite. Because I felt like for years, like now it's just it was kind of like ushering in of bringing in a token interview in some cases, because it's like, I look at it like this: it's all the owners. I don't know of an exact resolution to this, but it's going to have to start at the top, and it's ownership. You think about all the owners of the National Football League. How many minority owners are there? I got to be honest, there aren't too many. And I think about the years of nepotism, and we've seen it where we've seen family members of coaching staffs Rabbi know about this from our college days, legacies, and you have those individuals being hired. The thing is, though, what I hated about that plan, and I'm happy that so many people was against it, I felt like it was bribing owners, NFL teams, to just simply do the right thing, and giving a little more minority candidates a fair playing level as far as getting a coaching job. But if you just give them incentives, who's to say that whatever team may bring in just two, African American coaching candidates just to meet that requirement, but they already have the coaching candidate, that's coaching hire already in their minds, already in place, just to get extra draft picks. I mean, look, you can't put anything past NFL teams when it comes to trying to gain a competitive edge. I just think in this day and age, to have to give people an incentive to just simply do pretty much, which is, I say this again, do the right thing and give everyone a fair opportunity at a coaching job, then I just think it kind of lessens the value of even wanting a coaching job. Like, how would I feel if say the New York Giants, who have never had an African American head coach in their long traditional history, going to interview for a coordinator job, but the only reason why I'm getting hired is for draft picks? I don't think I would feel comfortable in that situation.
And that's why there was backlash to
it.
And that's why there was backlash to it.
Yeah.
Especially by
and I just feel like right now, if you want to start as far as come with a solution, you have to start holding these owners accountable. And Jay, you mentioned this during our meeting. You're talking about rich, old, white, in some cases, conservative men who have, contribute millions of dollars in the past to, I'm not going to say his name, obviously, to all different political campaigns and all these other things. But they're not actually putting their money where their mouth is,
right,
and trying to introduce more diversity into the National Football League. We only have two African American head coaches in the league, and that's Mike Tomlin and Brian Flores. And Brian Flores, obviously a guy I grew up with in Brooklyn. But like I said, the NFL has been, and this is not new. This has been going on for a long time. I mean, take back to in the 90s where you barely had Shell, who was the most visible Raiders coach. And then you go back, it's been a long time coming, but it always starts at ownership. If you're not going to hold ownership accountable, and granted, they come from a generation where maybe in their minds, they didn't see African Americans in a particular way, in a particular light, but you got to start holding these guys accountable. I mean, I think back to Colin Kaepernick. How many coaches and players came out and said he should be playing in the NFL, but which these owners stepped up and said the same thing? So, like I said, it's on ownership. You got to start with them.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony, you're being polite and diplomatic about it. I'm not going to be. You know, I mean, it goes back to this, and you hit on the head. How do you change the old boy network mindset and mentality that these owners have? Because that's what needs to be fixed. And I mean, look, and like I said, I'm not gonna be nice here. The NFL cringes if you even throw the racism word around at them. You know how Roger Goodell loves to kind of like use the shield to kind of like deflect that. But I mean, think about it, guys. The fact that the NFL needed a Rooney Rule in the first place and now needs it to be tweaked because teams have been paying it lip service and using loopholes to go around it is proof that even if the racism is latent and not across the board, to a certain extent, it is still there, though you will never get any of these owners to actually come out and admit it. You'll just have guys like the late Bob McNair talking about having the inmates running the prison. I mean, and here's the thing. If you want to get past this, it's nice to want to hold these guys accountable, but you can, the way back in the Old West saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can't make these guys drink the diversity Kool-Aid. Some of them just will not because, they're idiots, and the people they're using it for search finds don't understand what it takes to actually coach in this league or even be a coordinator in this league. But I mean, you at the end of the day, what may help is diversifying the ownership demographic. You need to get more people who aren't of that old white man or old boy network, who don't see African Americans who were former players, who are now coaches, and don't look at them the way back in the day, the way the owners from like 40 years ago look at black quarterbacks, which to some extent they're still looking at. And honestly, I don't know if any type of public pressure or shaming is going to help, but you need players and to a certain extent coaches to be a lot more outspoken about the fact, you need a guy like Andy Reid who keeps talking about how Eric Bieniemy deserves as much of a chance as anybody. Does opening up the Rooney Rule to allow for coordinator positions, meaning it allows position coaches to take those interviews to try and move up? Hopefully it does, because if you go coordinator is the next step to being a head coach. The question is, part of it will be if you can get more minorities and even women in front office positions, guys who have some say in the hiring of that next coach. Part of the issue is, and I think, and it's not fair to paint them with this brush, but other than Mike Tomlin, guys, how many African-American coaches that have come across the NFL landscape have truly been consistently successful? And when they're not, for the most part, they haven't been. And it makes it real easy for, again, the old boy network to overlook them and say, well, they just don't win. Why should I take a chance on somebody like that when I have this guy who's been a head coach at 3 different places and he's kind of won more often than he hasn't? It's like breaking a bad habit. the NFL needs to go to rehab for this.
First of all, stop talking about Jeff Fisher like that, because that's exactly who I think you're talking about.
Well,
also, I heard someone have a very good comment today. I don't know who said it, but as long as they start firing the Shanahans and Grudens of the world, maybe we'll get more minority head coaches out there. Also, there are 4 minority head coaches. We forgot about Anthony Lynn of the Chargers.
That's right.
And Ron Rivera, who is a minority of the Redskins.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a situation that, yes, everybody made good points. Jay, you made the point about the Good Old Boy Network. Anthony, you made the point about they don't get the chances. However, you do have to look at some of the factors, and Jay also mentioned it. There are, and again, it stinks the fact that bad precedents that doesn't help some people. But if you look at some of the failures of African-American head coaches like Hugh Jackson, who has gotten multiple chances in the NFL, Art Shell, I know that's a bad, that may not be a great example, Romeo Crennel, who never really made it out as a head coach. And one name that I kind of want to put down there, because I think his tenure in Cincinnati kind of didn't really work out too well, is Marvin Lewis.
Yeah.
Marvin Lewis is never going to get another chance in the NFL, and that's kind of a shame. But he was always known as somebody who kind of wore down his welcome in Cincinnati. So I really think that there's other rules that need to be made. This is a good start, but also, even in the case of Eric Bieniemy, he was a Super Bowl head coach. We talked about this in our production meeting. Give Super Bowl head coaches the same exact opportunity as other assistant head coaches to have jobs, and that might help the situation. It's just really the NFL ownership and coaching trees are broken systems, and they need to get with the times. And right now, they're not.
No, and haven't been for a while.
Yep. Anyway, it is just past 8 o'clock. Coming up later on this show, we have the last chance to talk The Last Dance.
Nice. Well played, Rabbi.
Nice.
That sounds like something I would have written. Well
I
done,
feel like
sir.
I've known you enough for too many years that I kind of write like you now. But we'll start off to continue our Best of New York series and talk about the best games to involve a New York sports team. These are the best and most impactful games in the New York sports landscape in, well, history. And keep in mind, the New York team did not have to be on the winning side of the decision. Just keep that in mind. We will have picks tonight that won't be shown as Yankee Classics or on Giants recaps because they actually lost. Jay, you have the first pick.
Here's the thing about my picks. I mean, both of them, one is a win, one is a loss, because, you can be involved, as Rabbi put it when he first, proffered this segment, that it didn't have to be a game in which the local team won. I'm like, ooh, that opens up possibilities. And I think both of these in their own way are iconic games, not just for the franchise in question, but for the sport as a whole for entirely different reasons. I'm going to lead off, and I'm the history professor tonight. I'm going into the way back room for you guys. I figure you'll take up things that are of more current nature.
As we should.
October 2.
What? Huh?
What? Huh? October 2, 1978, denting the Red Sox. Nothing creates heroes quite like a winner-take-all matchup, and few heroes in baseball history were more unlikely than Yankee shortstop Bucky Dent. Here's the backstory for, because there's a generation of our audience who has no idea about their game unless their dads regale them with it. Yankees were down 14 games to Boston in mid-July and embarked on one of the most ridiculous comebacks down the stretch to tie the Sox after 162 games, forcing a one-game playoff to decide the American League East. Now, despite having such stars as Reggie Jackson, Ron Guidry, who had a ridiculous season, 25 wins and a 1.78 ERA, third baseman Greg Nettles, and first baseman Chris Chambliss, guys who have done heroic things for the team, it would come down to Bucky, the Yankee shortstop. He would go down in Yankee lore and get that effing nickname that Sox fans use till this day. Here's how it played out. Friendly confines of Fenway Park. Sox jump out 2-0 after 6. Yankees get 2 on in the 7th. Here comes Dent. Nagging injuries. missing batty. He'd been hitting 125 over his last 20 games. It's the reason he was stuck in the 9-hole. The Sox were expecting, Dent, he's going to bunt. He's going to try and slap something somewhere. So Mike Torres doesn't see him as any threat, throws him something, and Dent just lays into it and lifts it over the green monster. 3-run shot. Yankees are up 3-2. They had 2 more insurance runs down the stretch, 1 on a homer by Jackson. Hauled off a 2-run late Boston rally to win 5-4, get them started on their way to their second straight title. That Red Sox loss kept the curse going that started in 1918 when they sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees and lasted until 2004. Now, it's funny, when I was doing my research, there were 3 things that happened in that game that I kind of had forgotten. Dent's home run, he hadn't gone deep in 6 weeks. He hadn't hit a home run since August 16th, and he was hitting just 199 between that game and his game winner. The bat he used wasn't even his own. It belonged to Mickey Rivers. Mick the Quick noticed Dent had a crack in his bat, gave him his midway through the plate appearance. And Dent's the only player to homer in a 1-game tiebreaker out of the 9 spot. And he was hitting 9th in all but 12 of his trips to the plate in the 78 season. When you think about it, it didn't stop there for Bucky. I mean, he was quiet in the ALCS with a 200 slash line, but he beat up on the Dodgers in the World Series to a tune of 417, 440, 458. Won the series MVP. It was literally that period of October was literally the highlight of his career. But as Brad Pitt portraying Billy Beane in Moneyball said, how can you not be romantic about baseball, especially when it gives us one of the greatest games in the Yankee-Red Sox rivalry, which is arguably the greatest rivalry in all of sports, and such out of nowhere hero, Bucky effing Dent.
Well, I'm gonna say it like this. I've been to Boston, and
So have I.
yeah, and saying the word Bucky Dent is like
A felony.
asking for it.
It's
Like
a felony
you're
to
literally
get your ass
asking
kicked.
for it by saying that name. I think about the curse of the Bambino, and that's a prime example. But the Red Sox with a huge divisional lead, and they squander it to the bitter rivalries, and on a 1-game playoff in their backyard, the most unlikeliest hero beats them. I think about him playing the bottom of the 9th inning where there's a blue base hit in the right field. Well, I can't remember the right fielder's name, but he lost in the sun, temporarily, and the ball happened to bounce back into his glove as he lost in the sun. Now imagine if that ball gets behind him and the Red Sox with runners on can win the game on a bad play. It was just the Costa Bambino just happened to involve some of those fluky plays when you think about how it always up until 2004 went in the Yankees' favor. Earlier today, they were showing the Aaron Boone home run, and the fact that Jorge Posada got jammed on a great pitch and somehow still found a hole in shallow center field when a ball fell between 2 Red Sox fielders. It felt like for so long it was if you're a Red Sox fan, it was like the inevitable. Okay, what's gonna happen that's gonna cost us a chance at the World Series? And Bucky Dent, the most unlikeliest home run hitter in a lineup that had Thurman Munson and Reggie Jackson, of all people, beat you. That stuck with, I'm quite sure that stuck with Red Sox fans for the longest. Still do, of course. And then, of course, 1986 come around, and we have Bill Buckner. Then fast forward to 2003, and it's Aaron Boone. I mean, you talk about years of torment. Bucky Dent, I mean, he earned that nickname for a reason.
He did.
Obviously the middle name we can't use on here for obvious reasons.
We can use it. No, I can't use that one.
No, I have family who follow me on social media. I gotta keep my language clean for the most part. But yes, Bucky Dent's home run, one of the great moments in Yankees Red Sox rivalry.
A couple of things that I kind of want to clean up here. First of all, the way that we got to this game, which I still think is the most important Yankees Red Sox game in the history of this rivalry, and definitely pre-wild card era, easily the most important game in the history of this rivalry. Note the Red Sox won 8 straight going into this game, and the Yankees, the only reason why we got to this game is they won 6 straight going into the final day of the season and they lose to Cleveland and have to play this 2:30 wild card game the next day. That's the first thing. Number two, shame on you, Jay, for not mentioning the most important Yankee of 1976 to his death in 1979 in Thurman Munson, who drove in the Spurs insurance run to make it 4-2.
I forgot about that. My bad.
Yes. And also, Ron Guidry had one of the best seasons of a pitcher ever. Yes,
1.74 actually 1.78. It was 1.74 before this game. The runs he gave up kicked it up. Had over 250 strikeouts. He's one of the few pitchers to ever have that many wins, that low in ERA, and that many strikeouts. It was an insane season for him.
Plus, Goose Gossage getting a save, and I know he gave up the 2 runs to make it 5-4, but the man went 2 2/3. In what freaking era are you going to see a reliever get a save after going 2 2/3? You don't even see that in a playoff game anymore.
Nope.
It shows what the difference is between baseball in 1978 and baseball in 2020, and how everything is just this little patchwork game. I think this is a perfect game to start off. It really just shows the history of the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry and just comes to a crescendo here. Again, I still think, despite the Aaron Boone game, despite the comeback in 2004, and you could say the Bloody Sock game and the Aaron Boone game are still two of the most are as important in this rivalry. I think this is just as important, if not more. Anthony, you have pick number 2. Go ahead.
You know what? For me, I'm going back to 1994, June 14th, the night the 54-year curse of the New York Rangers finally ended. And I watched this game the other day. It had been a long time. Game 7 against the Vancouver Canucks. It struck me on how close this game really was, that the scores and the stat sheet doesn't actually make it any justice. You think about the Rangers core 4. You're talking about Mark Messier, Brian Leach, Alexei Kovalev, and Mike Richter. All 4 of them played a big part in the Rangers finally winning the Stanley Cup that night. The Rangers blew a 3-1 series lead going into Game 7. They had lost Game 1 in overtime, came back, bounced back, won Game 2, won both games 3 and 4 in Vancouver, highlighted by Mike Richter's stopping Pavel Bure on a penalty shot in Game 4 of that series. They come back to Massachusetts for Game 5 and basically they were in a hole from the start. They fell behind 3 goals, played from behind the entire time, and the Canucks finally put them away. Had a bad performance in Game 6. Finally, the anxiety, if you're a Ranger fan, the anxiety is driven up. And Game 7 starts out, the Rangers get a 2-goal lead to end in the first period. Brian Leach scores on a goal, and Kovalev scores on a power play. So it's 2-0. But the Canucks, because they were one of the lowest seeds in the Western Conference, were on that Cinderella one of their own, would not go away. Trevor Linden, who we kind of forget he was on that team, was a good player, scored 2 goals by himself. And each time the Rangers had a 2-goal lead, he scored and cut the lead in half. Finally, Mark Messier scores in the late in the second period to make it 3-1, and that would prove to be the game winner. Except Trevor Linden scores again on a power play, and it's 3-2. How many times in that third period did the Canucks hit the post? It's beyond me. There was at least 2 separate occasions where Mike Richter is beat dead to rights, including one where he lost his glove and the puck hits the outside of the post. The second one, he's beaten on a slap shot from about 6 feet away, and it hits the top post and bounces and stays out. It was like, if you're a Ranger fan, those plays literally always went against the Rangers during this 54-year jinx, okay? I think back to 1992 with Richter letting in seemingly a 30-foot goal get through his legs in the semifinals against the Penguins. And I think about Brian Leach slipping on ice and breaking his foot like the most fluky. Like you want to talk about Red Sox coaches? The Rangers were a coach team on their own
That's right.
with fluky moments.
Yeah.
And in this case, when Trevor Linden cuts the lead down to 3-2, it's probably the most anxiety 15 minutes and 32 seconds you ever witnessed as a Rangers fan. Yeah, of all time. Because I know me personally, I did not watch any of the Rangers Stanley Cup playoff games on TV. I listened to it on radio because I was superstitious. And at one point, I literally wanted to throw my 1994. I wanted to throw my Walkman out of the window because I couldn't do it anymore. But the Rangers managed to hold on, and even the final seconds were anxiety-driven because the officials called an icing with 1.3 seconds left when the Canucks had the empty net. They pulled the goalie. You can't call a penalty. You can't even call you can't call icing on a play like that. I'm watching it back and I'm looking like, is he kidding me? But it was just an emotional anxiety evening. The Rangers finally able to win the Stanley Cup. That was definitely one of the greatest moments in New York sports. Obviously one of the greatest games because it finally ended a jinx. But the Rangers had 2 opportunities in the series to win the Stanley Cup and couldn't pull the job. And you think about the previous series, the conference finals against the Devils, how that series was back and forth. The first 2 rounds, the Rangers made it look so easy in sweeping the Islanders and beating the Capitals in 5 games that I think a lot of pundits thought that the Rangers was going to kind of cakewalk their way through Vancouver, and the Canucks showed why they were, the 7th, 8th seed going into the Stanley Cup playoffs and was on their own magical run. And it was just one of the best games I've ever seen.
You know what? I got to tell you, that is going to go down in history. I mean, you can talk about anything else the Rangers accomplished, prior to them winning that cup. And back in the day, they were a team that was a contender, and they had their moments. But there is something special, something legendary, something iconic, and something just different when you are a New York sports team and you have been that has a long-suffering fan base like the Rangers had, who had, been this close times, and had to suffer through the 5-year, the 5-year run in the 80s of the Islanders, the redheaded stepbrother from way out on the island, dominating the NHL, and they had to put up with that, to, at that point, behind Mark Messier and the rest of that core, and it was such a magical season and such a magical postseason. I mean, and when Messier invoked, channeled his inner Joe Namath and made that guarantee, and then, he made sure of it with his own play on the ice, and then it comes down to it, and they get into the finals, and they win the finals. It was just, I don't think New York has never been as amazing a place to be when a sports team wins a title here, especially if it has been so damn long since they've won one before that moment in time. And I'll tell you what, you're not really going to see a moment like that again, probably until the Jets win a Super Bowl, because they are now officially the longest suffering New York sports fan base. And I'll tell you what, when it's finally their turn and it happens, and guys, I hope I do see it in my lifetime, this city is going to be as insane in the best way like it was that night in 1994.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. Go ahead, bye-bye.
Yeah, before we get to you, Anthony, first of all, I would have picked the Devils game just for the sheer 2 overtime classic. That's real Stanley Cup hockey. But as I said, I almost died at least 100 times watching Game 4 at my sister's house at Long Beach. And it was the most nerve-wracking I've ever been as a sports fan because of that. First of all, another few things. You know who Vancouver beat in the Western Conference Finals as a 7th seed? Toronto. Yes, Toronto was in the West at one point. Yeah, and also Marc Messier scoring what ended up being the winning goal. Did you know that so many years later, in fact, just 3 years ago, he said, I didn't score that goal. It was actually
he said that Brian Noonan should have gotten
that
credit
Noonan
for the
was the
goal.
guy who
If
scored
you watch
that.
the replay, it looked like Noonan's stick might have actually knocked the puck in. But here's another interesting thing. Bob Cole, who did the game, who called that series for CBC Hockey Night in Canada, to this day said that Game 7 was one of the most memorable games that he's called as a play-by-play announcer in his career, just because of the fact that it was Madison Square Garden. It was the Rangers. It was one of the highest rated Game 7s in the history of CBC and ESPN, who broadcast the game nationally. Here in New York, it was shown exclusively on the MSG network, which is why you normally only see the MSG feed of that game. You have to look really hard online to find the ESPN or the CBC broadcast of that game. Me personally, as a Ranger fan, I only watched one game of that Stanley Cup final on TV. It was Game 1 where the Rangers lost. So I was like, okay, I'm not watching any more games. I feel like I'm jinxing them. So I'm going to listen to them. I listened to them on WFBN the entire time. I ran to my mind went blank. I ran to Fan Healy a few years ago, and I talked to him about it, and I asked him how long did that 15 minutes last for him. He said about 54 years. I think I was like everyone else at this point. But I think it was just because the Rangers was like, you felt like you got to Game 7, you're thinking in the back of your head, like the Devils says, is this where the coast going to kick in? Are we going to blow this series? Because you got to think about the Rangers fell behind 3-2 to New Jersey and were blowing a 3-1 series lead after having played from behind Game 5 and a really bad performance. And you know what? One of the things is the goalie matchup was on point too. You think about Mike Richter, he made 28 stops. McLean, who started for the Canucks, made 32. Normally you win games in that manner, but like I said, the Rangers holding on, and that third period showed that hockey is a matter of inches. The Rangers, despite a matter of inches on a couple of occasions, were able to hold on to that lead.
Yeah, and Vancouver would go on to lose another Stanley Cup Finals after that in 2011 and had lost before in 1982. All right, speaking of losers of championship games, that brings us to my first pick, and it is a very memorable game. It is the Giants' second Super Bowl. That's Super Bowl 25 back in 1991 in the old sombrero of Tampa Bay. So if you're looking for great games and games with a significance, which is the two criteria I really, really wanted for this, what's more significant than the Giants' second Super Bowl in 5 years? And really the Bills' first and easily their best chance. They didn't even get anywhere near close in any of the next 3 Super Bowls. This was easily their best chance to win the Super Bowl. Oh, yeah, and you had the backdrop of the Gulf War coming in there and Whitney Houston singing the Star-Spangled Banner to everybody. Now, obviously, just jumping to the end, this is known as the Scott Norwood wide right game, the 47-yard missed field goal with 8 seconds left in the game. Giants were changed forever as a franchise after that kick, which is wide right, and the call of Al Michaels on ABC. Just memorable, wonderful game if you ever get to see it. It's a game that is kind of in the middle of what you want. It was not a defensive slugfest, but it wasn't really an offensive shootout. And of course, it's remembered by the Giants 2 huge drives, a 9-minute, 29-second drive in the third quarter and a 7+ minute drive in the fourth quarter. And the Giants have since then had a longer drive and had that in Super Bowl 42. So when you think the Giants, you think ball possession, and you had 2 13-3 games coming into this game. You had one being quarterbacked by Jim Kelly, who was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at the time. that's really your Goliath because you had a David. I know a 13-3 team can't really be considered a David.
Well,
But when you're led by Jeff Hostetler, who did finish 2-0 and ended up finishing 5-0 as the Giants QB in backup duty, you kind of have that role as the David to the Bills Goliath.
yeah.
You had one of the best running back matchups I think we've ever seen in Super Bowl history. Otis Anderson went for 100-plus yards and a touchdown, but Thurman Thomas went for 190 all-purpose yards, 135 on the ground, 55 through the air as a receiver. I know a Sports Illustrated guy, Dr. Z is called, has said he should have been the MVP, and he would have. And I think that's easily a good choice because he really stood out in this game. And then, of course, you have to realize when you look back at it, that Giants staff, 10 Super Bowl victories eventually on that Giants staff because you have 2 for Parcells, 6 for the devil himself, Bill Belichick, and 2 more for quarterback coach Tom Coughlin. Yes, who knew that a coordinating tree would end up giving us Super Bowl 42 and 46 as coaching matchup? You take all the elements of this game, the closeness of this game, and the impact this game had in the history of the NFL. I know we talk about Super Bowl 42 a lot because of the Patriots losing, not getting 19-0. But when you look back at it, this has all of the qualities of the best game ever in New York sports history, definitely Giants history.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where in my mind, I mean, the Buffalo Bills don't get enough credit for what they did in that era. 4 straight trips to the Super Bowl. Everybody goes, oh, they went 0-4. Y'all know how hard it is to actually get there, let alone get there 4 years in a row? I mean, that team doesn't get enough credit, and yeah, you don't go wide right, and everybody likes to harp on that, but we all know that there's
it was a tough kick. It's a 47-yard field goal.
Yeah. But I mean, you guys got to remember, everybody likes to talk about that because it's basically was the last play, that sticks in people's minds. How many other plays did or did not get made on either side that ultimately led to that even being the situation? Because if you think about it, as you put it, Rabbi, on paper, the Bills were the overwhelming favorite coming into that game. And everybody's like, oh, man, there's no way. I mean, you can equate it to the Jets playing Johnny Unitas and the Colts, even though Unitas didn't really play in that game. But, I mean, still, that's the level of, the Bills were thought of up here. The Giants were, come on, really? Who do they got that can really stop them? But it is the one that basically set the tone for what we consider the current era of Giants football and kind of gave them the identity that they held on to, and to a certain extent still have or are looking to try and get back to. So was it the greatest Super Bowl ever? Not even the greatest Super Bowl the Giants ever played in. But in terms of what it meant to the franchise as a stepping stone for that franchise being back, yeah.
A little backdrop to that Super Bowl, the 2 teams had actually played a month earlier in the regular season in the Meadowlands, and it happened to be the game that Phil Simms lost for the season. He tore his Achilles. Jim Kelly was knocked out of that game also. It was a very physical game, and the Bills held on to win that game. And, a lot of people looked at Buffalo because we was in that middle of that NFC dominance in the Super Bowl, and we looked at Buffalo because they had kind of beaten teams in the NFC East as that team that could ultimately end the NFC string of Super Bowl wins. Now, this was the season that did not have a bye week in the Super Bowl. Like the week prior, the Giants gave them a high and squeaked out an NFC Championship game win, ending the 49ers bid for a 3-peat. The Bills, on the other side, literally destroyed Oakland 51-3 in the most lopsided championship game in league history. And that Raider team was not exactly a cakewalk. They literally destroyed them with the run and shoot offense, or the K-gun, which is what Marv Levy called it. One of the key plays in that Super Bowl was the safety on Jeff Hostetler. Bruce Smith, if you go back and watch the replay, Bruce Smith grabs Jeff Hostetler's right arm in an attempt to knock the ball away. Hostetler had the will to pull the ball away and cover up and get sacked in the end zone, whereas the Bills got 2 points instead of a possible fumble recovery for a touchdown and getting 7, and maybe their Super Bowl is entirely different. But also, you think about the 2 drives that the Giants had. They literally ran the ball down the Bills' throats.
It was their game plan.
That defense was absolutely gassed in that second half. But more importantly, it kept the Bills' offense off the field for more than an hour. When you think about the halftime show plus that 9-minute drive, you're talking about 45 minutes in real time when the Bills' offense did not even see the field. They were on the sideline, cold as an ice cube. You think about the Mark Ingram throw down, catch and run when he dove for the extra yards. Think about Otis Anderson's run when he uppercuts a Bills defender. But also one of the key things was the Giants defense, which is, by the way, that defensive playbook is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yes.
They only rushed 3, sometimes 2 defenders. The key was not to get to Jim Kelly. It was to pressure and beat up the Bills receiving core, which had Andre Reed, which had Don Beebe, which had James Lofton. This is a team that led the league in offense and didn't need the ball to really put on points. Has case in point, Thurman Thomas' touchdown run, which was a 34-yard run, literally just 5 plays after the Giants had that long touchdown drive. But prior to the Scott Norwood kick, and I'll never forget this, they put up his statistics kicking on grass for 40 yards and more, and it was literally a below average. So I don't know if that was an omen, because Scott Norwood, obviously the Bills playing in Orchard Park and playing on unofficial turf, it's a little easier to get your grip on footing when you're kicking than in grass, especially in a hot, humid Tampa, Florida. And Scott Norwood had this habit of kicking kind of straightforward. He never really pulled or hooked his kicks. Yep. And you saw it on that missed field goal that he kicked it straightforward on the right hash mark, where if he puts a little bit of a golfer hook to it, it goes through without any trouble. And I think about that kick compared to what Lawrence Tynes did in the freezing cold in Green Bay, where it looked like it was going to be missed completely, and it hooked straight down the middle of the uprights.
Or what Matt Barr ended up doing the week before, by the way.
Yeah, that barely
49ers to win, and that was from 42.
Yeah, and that barely squeaked in. It looked so different when NFL Films show it to the CBS broadcast, where it looked like it just got in. But that Giant team at 13-3, and the fact that Bill Parcells and that coaching staff pretty much changed their entire offense and implement Jeff Hostetler's ability to run and scramble, which obviously Phil Simms could not do, into that offense. I think it helped a lot. But also the Giants defense, they wasn't concerned with going out to Jim Kelly. They literally said, if you go back to the Full Falls of Buffalo documentary on the Buffalo Bills, or even the documentary on Parcells and Belichick, they literally said, if they let Dermot Thomas get 100 yards, we win. Mainly because if you're running the ball, the clock is going. But if you're throwing the ball around like the Bills was known for doing to get big plays, then you're going to run up the scoreboard. But also, you don't need much time to do it. And the fact that Andre Reed after the game said he never been hit as hard as much as he was in that game pretty much shows how physical that Giant defense was. It doesn't rank up there with the '86 Giant team, which is one of the all-time great teams. But that 1990 team led the league in points against. Like, it was literally a contrasting tale of 2 different styles.
ESPN considered them the 6th best defense of all time. And I think when you look at it, this Giants team goes down in history. This Giants, you've never really seen a 13-3 David, as I said, but this team kind of showed the heart of a champion, even though they were a big bad team during the regular season. Jay, your final thoughts on this, or just want to go straight to pick number 2?
You know what? The only other thing I can add is that it's interesting to me is the fact that the Giants of that era won 2 Super Bowls with 2 distinctly different types of offenses and 2 distinctly different types of quarterbacks.
They had to.
They had to. But it's you kind of forget just how good of a coach in that era Parcells was. I mean, everybody remembers him, later in his career with teams that he is not really associated with.
Cowboys.
Trying to recapture the magic of the Giant era. But I mean, that man resurrected the Giant franchise, and he took them to 2 Super Bowls, and he did it with teams that were similar but different enough that he had to coach each one of them slightly differently, and he deserves the credit that he's given for just how good of a coach he was back in his era.
Oh, and by the way, that transitions into your second pick, since we went from one era to the Giants to an era to the Giants that TVs were pretty much in black and white at that time. If I'm
that is true, and then I'm even going to, I started in 1978, but I'm going to dial up Jules Verne and take the time machine back 20 years more to 1958 to the greatest game ever played. You think that's the 1958 NFL championship game between the Baltimore Colts, led by Johnny Unitas, and the New York Giants. Here's the backstory for this. Professional football was very much on the rise in the 1950s and really started to take off in the latter part of that decade now. And a lot of the popularity of the sport can be traced to this single game. Played at Yankee Stadium, attracted a national television audience. And the game, essentially, because it was a nationally televised game, it captured the collective attention of the nation, and it kind of propelled pro football to explode in popularity across the country. And by the mid-1960s, it was easy to say this was the nation's, favorite sport to watch, and a lot of us will arguably say it's been there ever since. If you think about this, the Giants had gone ahead 17-14. The Colts came back at the late in the game to tie it. Frank Gifford was stopped short on a 3rd down. He, till his dying day, felt that he made it. And because, somebody got hurt and the refs were distracted, the ball was not placed where it should have been. And that was what allowed the Colts to come back down and tie the game and send it in overtime. There were six lost fumbles. There were missed field goals. There was interceptions galore. It was skill-wise and aesthetically pleasing-wise, it was not the greatest game you'll ever see. But when Johnny Unitas comes onto the field from his own 14-yard line and after 2 incompletions connects with Lenny Moore to set the offense up the field and to get them there, and then they get into and he misses on a long one. 2nd and 10, he finds Raymond Berry, who he connected with so many times in that game. 3 times in that drive alone. 7 seconds left in regulation. Steve Meyer knocks in a 20-yarder to send the game into overtime. And remember, guys, this is the first time in league history that a championship game would be decided at sudden death. Giants won the toss, forced a punt, went 3 and out. Baltimore's offense goes 80 yards, 13 plays, and Alan Amici punches it through at the 1-yard line for the game-winning TD after 8 minutes and 15 seconds of overtime. Colts win, NFL title secured. Think about this, guys. 17 future Hall of Famers played in that game. Some of the more obvious ones that everybody knows: Raymond Berry, Weeb Eubanks, who's the coach of the Colts, Lenny Moore, Jim Parker, Gino Marchetti, Art Donovan, and of course Johnny U. Giants side. You talk about the Giants being dominant in a particular era, Rabbi. Check this out. Rosie Brown, Frank Gifford, Sam Huff, Tom Landry, and Vince Lombardi, who were coaches at the time. Tim Mara, Wellington Mara, who were they were in control of the Giants even way back then. Don Maynard, who was on his last legs playing for the Giants that year. Andy Robustelli and Emlyn Tunnell. 17 Hall of Famers in that game. And I'm going to give you the last word on this game because it basically comes from the NFL itself. It was voted the best game by far as part of the NFL celebration of its 100th season last year. A nationwide panel of 66 media members chose it over such classics as the 1981 NFC title game featuring Montana to Clark, otherwise known as The Catch, the Ice Bowl, Green Bay over Dallas in 1967, and even the Patriots coming back from 28-3 down to beat the Falcons in the Super Bowl. All these years later, and it is still considered the greatest game ever played. Drop mic.
You know what? I'm not going to disagree with you, Jay, because I feel like that for many years, that game has been looked at as kind of setting the tone for what we see in the modern NFL. We see, obviously, the television broadcast and the fact that it was the first time a title game would be decided in a sudden death overtime. I feel like that game, and you named all the cast of players I was in there. It wasn't the greatest game as far as skill-wise, but I think it captured the imagination of a nationwide audience enough that it played a big part in the National Football League's success, especially as far as the TV, as far as television. Obviously, you saw like camera angles for the first time, you see like the shot of Amishi going into the end zone from behind that end zone.
Yep.
Something that was brand new. We're talking about the 50s.
That photograph is one of the most iconic sports photographs ever taken to this day.
Yeah, to this day, and I gotta say, it played a great part in really like the seeds and the growth of the National Football League to where it is today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one other little tidbit. In overtime, during the broadcast, the game got delayed because apparently someone ran out onto the field of the considering I guess I'm the one who's just doing these legends. Apparently, this was somebody from NBC saying, oh, the national television feed has actually gone dead because of an unplugged TV signal cable. But however, the delay of the game brought NBC enough time to fix the problem before the next play. So apparently this was kind of like the Heidi situation of the 1950s. So
the Heidi situation before there was a Heidi situation.
It's the greatest game ever played, but obviously not the greatest technology ever created in 1958.
Hey, for 1958, that was high-tech tech.
That is true.
And yes, in 1958, we had people running onto the field inexplicably, and now we still have that today.
Yes. And we probably had better
different reasons.
And we had probably security guards better back then. Anyway, Anthony, you have pick number 2. Go right ahead.
Wow. I'm going to go to the 1999 National League Championship Series Game 5, which is officially known as the Grand Slam Single.
Yes.
The Mets winning that game. You want to talk about a game that literally had everything, including the kitchen sink. You had it all. You had a Met team that was resilient, that came from behind the night before off of nemesis John Rocker. Met fans never forget that name.
Yeah.
And then they take a 2-0 lead on a John Oliver home run against Greg Maddux of all pitchers, a guy who just shredded the Mets for years. Atlanta coming back on their own in the 4th inning to tie the game up. And then from that point on, you want to talk about missed opportunities by both teams. The Mets had the bases loaded at one point, couldn't score. Atlanta stressed 19 runners on base. You want to talk about a botched suicide squeeze that almost got all Hushheiser ran over at home plate, who, by the way, came in and pitched 2 key innings after Masato Yoshii was knocked out of the game to keep the game tied. At 41 years old, old Hushheiser was able to turn back the clock one more time to get the Mets out of a big jam that could have led to the season ending prematurely. Then you talk about Keith Lockhart getting thrown out at home plate on a great throw by Melvin Mora and a good relay throw by Edgardo Alfonso that gets him out by at least 3 feet. Then you talk about there was so many things about this game. Also, here's a fun fact. I don't know if anyone of you saw this on Instagram. A current NFL player's dad pitched in this game. Anybody want to take a guess?
I know the answer to this, so I'm not going to guess it.
All right, Jay?
A current Major League player's father pitched in this game?
A current NFL player.
Oh, NFL player.
Dad pitched in this game.
I'm going to go Pat Mahomes.
Yes, he pitched the inning for the Mets out of the bullpen. If you follow me on Instagram, I kind of took a brief shot of that and threw a little tip. And I wonder what his son doing these days. But
I hear he's kicking around the NFL a little bit.
I hope he's obsessed with ketchup. That's another thing. But outside that point.
And winning Super Bowls, by the way. But that's.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, but you think about it, Atlanta finally took the lead in the top half of the 15th inning. And even then, the Mets would not go away. They load the bases, and Tom Pratt, but keep in mind, he was the hero in the divisional series against the Arizona Diamondbacks with the walk-off series winner in Game 4 when he replaced an injured Mike Piazza to start that game. And Kevin McGlinchey was pitching for the Atlanta Braves, walks him. So now the game is tied at 3-3. Bobby Ventura, who had went hitless going into Game 5, finally got his first hit in that game and was playing on a bad calf, hits a grand slam. And only in Mets lore can a grand slam not actually count as a grand slam home run.
Yeah.
Now, while Ventura sees the ball flying over the right field wall, apparently his teammates didn't see it because they knew with one out and a bases loaded, any ball deep into the outfield wins the game. With Roger Cedeno on third base, who did not start because he had an ailing back injury. They were so happy that Ventura won the game. They didn't see the ball clear the right field fence, and they tackled and mobbed him after he touched first base. Now, for those of you who are watching on Facebook who are not familiar with baseball rules, for a home run to count as a home run, the batter has to touch first, second, third, and home plate in succession for the home run to count. Because Ventura only touched first base, it was counted as a single only in the official scores books. Now, a lot of people in Vegas lost money because of this. That's another story for another time. And it was counted as a single rather than a grand slam walk-off home run, which would have made the score 7-3. In fact, it was 4-3. If you watch the NBC broadcast of that game, Joe Morgan is actually explaining that Ventura only touched first base before he's mobbed by his teammates before he can reach second. Thankfully, the game was already tied because we would have had a lot of problems if they didn't let him touch second base for a second run to count. But it went down as a single. The Mets win 4-3, forced a Game 6. They come from behind in that game before eventually bowing out to Atlanta in extra innings on a game-winning bases-loaded walk sealed up by Kenny Rogers to Andrew Jones. But the talk of that series was more about the Mets than Atlanta, to the point where Delta Airlines, who were the official airlines of the Mets and Atlanta Braves, took out an ad congratulating and thanking the Mets for a job well done and an exciting postseason run. Kind of forgetting that it kind of ruffled a few feathers in the Atlanta Braves and the Atlanta fan base when you do that. But yeah, it's definitely one. But this game ended. It started at a little after 4 o'clock. It ended at 9:47 p.m. Game 4 of the American League Championship Series between the Yankees and the Red Sox was in the bottom half of the 5th inning. That game started 3 hours later, and that's just telling you how long that game lasted. Over almost 6 hours, 5 hours and 47 minutes. At that time, it was the longest game in postseason history.
Yeah, I got to tell you, you go back over the Mets' history, and a lot of their history is them snatching victory from the jaws of defeat, and it's been somewhat of a theme throughout their entire history. So when they actually snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, it kind of sticks with you. I mean, the back and forth of this game, you have, this bitter rivalry that there existed at this time in the 90s between the Mets and the Braves. To have an unlikely hero like Robin Ventura, who was not at his peak when he became a Met. I mean, he had his peak of his career as a Gold Glove winning and home run slugging and RBI driving and third baseman for the White Sox. But he gave the Mets veteran leadership. He's a guy you could count on. Just, it's ironic that, there wasn't – chances are – I mean, he wasn't even really supposed to play in that game. And you got to figure that, if the game doesn't go 15 fracking innings, he doesn't even get into the game. That's kind of how far it had to go for him to get to that point. But, to me, it's just another example where I can requote Brad Pitt as Billy Beane. How can you not get romantic about baseball when it gives you games like this?
And by the way, and by the way, the rest of that game was playing a steady downpour.
Yeah.
Like, it was raining off and on. In the 15th inning, it started coming down much harder. The umpires did a good job of not suspending play at any point and just kind of letting the teams play on. But you think about the bullpens that was used by both teams, they were gas. I mean, the one thing that this series did to the Atlanta Braves is that it left them virtually gas going into the World Series against the Yankees. They had nothing. When they lost that first game,
they had nothing.
It was like the Yankees just kind of steamrolled from that point on. I mean,
this
was peak Mets Braves, and you think about the next season. You think about the John Rocker, the comments he made in Sports Illustrated, Chipper Jones and Brian Jordan, who was one of those two-sport guys that we kind of get lost in the shuffle with the Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders of the world.
Atlanta Falcons.
And then you think about the 2000 season when the Mets came back from an 8-run deficit and won a regular season game in front of Rockin' Shea Stadium. And again, the Braves won the division, but lost in the first round to St. Louis, and they actually made the Mets' postseason life a little easier in the fact that they didn't have to run into the Atlanta Braves again to get to the Subway Series. This was throughout the 90s, the Atlanta Braves dominated the National League East, and this was at a time when the Mets finally felt like they were on equal ground. Keep in mind, the Braves swept the Mets in Atlanta and left them all for dead with 5 games out of the wild card spot with a week to play. They were 3 games out going into the final weekend, and the Mets had to win all 3 games just to put themselves in the position of a 1-game playoff, which, by the way, Cincinnati forced after 5 rain delays the same day in a game that didn't end till well after midnight. Atlanta pitched a gem in the wild card game, and of course the Mets knocked off Arizona, 100-win Arizona Diamondback team in 4 games, including beating up Randy Johnson in the first game, and Algarve Alfonso hitting 2 home runs, including a grand slam. The Braves series, they fell behind 3-0, including Tom Glavine 1-0 shutout win in Game 3 of that series. For the Mets to come back and be the first team to even force a 6th game of that series, let alone come very close to winning that series, was kind of an indictment of that 1999 Mets team and a never say die mentality.
They were actually the second team to do it because the team that actually did it the year before was the Atlanta Braves against the
against
Padres.
San Diego, yes. The Padres.
So that was it. Before I get to my final pick, I just want to quote the great Bob Costas, who I heard enough of this week because he did the 1998 NBA Finals, just saying this after Ventura's blast. And as I said, the Braves kind of set 98 up for 99, and the Mets kind of set up 99 for 2000. But let me just tell you this quote. These Mets are Rasputin-like. You cannot put them away. They will not die. And that stadium.
That's spot on. And the only thing I can add to that, Rabbi, is the quote by Bobby Valentine right after that game. I'm obviously mentally drained. He goes, quote, "I've been in long games, but not games where every pitch meant so much."
Yeah, and that's the thing with 15-inning games in the postseason. It's almost like your hockey overtime games. All right.
Yep.
So I'm going to go way back from 1999 to earlier in 1999, specifically right around May, June, and talk about the Knicks' run to the NBA Finals in 1999, the first 8 seed. Kind of almost an NHL situation when you see low seeds in the finals all the time, but they had a memorable run. There were a few great games on this run, and a lot of people could think that 1999 Game 5 against the top-seeded Heat, where Allen Houston hit another shot that basically made me gasp as it went up, hit the rim, and went down. But let's talk about the Game 3 against the Pacers in that Eastern Conference Finals, which is the better played and more memorable game in my view. And we know it for one major thing, the Larry Johnson 4-point play as the Knicks were down 90. As I actually put that up on my in the tease for this today. But Knicks were down 91-88, win the game 92-91. First 2 games of this series were decided by one possession. The Knicks won Game 1. The Pacers won Game 2 on a last-second three by Reggie Miller. Game 3 of this series was no different. This is a game that, in that postseason, Marcus Camby and Latrell Sprewell were coming off the bench in a lot of games, especially in games 1, 2, and 3. And Camby went for 21 in this game, one of his best games in the Knicks. Sprewell went for 14. And Larry Johnson had a 26-point game, was really the MVP of that game, best game as a Knick. And this is also most important because this is the first game where Patrick Ewing was not in the lineup. And a lot of Knicks fans had thought this was pretty much over because Indiana was kind of coming off the finals of the previous year against the Bulls. They thought it was their time. This game had 16 ties, 16 lead changes. Knicks only led like 9 minutes in this game. Indiana led 24. I don't think the Knicks win the Eastern Conference without this game. The Pacers were probably a better matchup for the Spurs that year in the NBA Finals, but this is a Knicks team that had one of the most unlikely runs to a finals appearance. I don't think we're going to see a run like that in New York sports. And the Larry Johnson 4-point play, which many people can still debate to this day, especially if you live in Indiana, really set the tone for this entire series.
If you go on... I'm sorry, Jay, go ahead.
Rabbi, if you think about it, this was a strike-shortened season. So, there are people who kind of like to put an asterisk next to it. But it was a full NBA playoffs season.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, what makes it stand out for me with this Knicks team is this is Ewing towards the tail end of his career. He's 36 years old. He is very much no longer the focus of this team. This is a team that is led by Allen Houston, by Latrell Sprewell, Larry Johnson, and Marcus Camby. This is not Ewing's team, and you saw it where other guys on this team had to step up at various points during the season, during the series. The fact that, more than one guy led, that different people were leading the Knicks in scoring at various points, though, Larry Johnson was a guy who you seem to get the sense that he could be the most consistent. Everybody talks about that, but the Knicks, was Indiana on paper the better team? Yeah. Was Indiana going to be a better matchup for the Spurs? Yeah, sure. Because we all knew that even though that the Knicks getting past Indiana was about as good as it was going to get because there's no way they were getting past the Spurs. But, you talk about the way the Knicks were able to score the basketball. They held Reggie Miller to shooting less than 37% from the floor for this.
One of his worst games in the playoffs of all time.
Nobody else on that team could really score the basketball. No one else was above 13 points a game. So if Reggie wasn't, dropping it in the bucket, they weren't winning. So you think about it. They struggled at various points in this series. The Knicks were in every game, had an opportunity to win every game except, game 4, where Indiana came into the Garden and blew them out 90-78. And then back in the day in this year, that was a blowout. But I mean, the Knicks were in every game. They lost game 2 by 2. They could have had the Pacers there. So, you never know.
They closed out Market Square Arena with that Game 5 victory, by the way, too.
Yeah. I mean, which was not an easy thing to do in that day and age. But the fact that they were able to just shut down Reggie Miller and make this series ridiculously tough for him is a large reason why they were able to advance. I mean, Latrell Sprewell goes down in infamy in Knicks history for the whole choking thing. But people forget, in his prime, when he was locked on, he was one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA when he was at his prime. And he was the guy with the yeoman's task of shutting down Miller. And for the most part, he did one hell of a job.
He was also a Timberwolf at that time, so we didn't care. We would take anybody in that time as long as they were a productive scorer.
Considering the of malcontents who went through the Garden. Mark Strickland.
Everybody.
Don Marbury.
Talk about that. You can go on a whole show with that.
Yes, I could.
If you walk around Madison Square Garden, especially the second floor, the 200 level, they have Larry Johnson's Converse sneaker that he wore in that game, along with Jeff Van Gundy's game plan and a frame and a booklet of the 1999 Knicks framed in the Madison Square Garden concourse area. You can walk by, you can see all the stats and information from that game. When you think about the play itself, the inbound pass was tipped. Keep that in mind. There's a good chance that if that ball's stolen, Larry Johnson doesn't get a chance to get a shot off, let alone a three-pointer attempt. But hey, say what you will, if it was a foul or not, Antonio Davis did what he could. But you know what? Larry Johnson still had to make a free throw after he made that three-point play. I just remember him running down court and telling Chris Charles to back away, back off, because he started making a free throw to give the Knicks a lead. He was able to do that. But you think about that 1999 Knicks team, and they had barely squeaked into the playoffs in the strike-shortened season. They had a lot of guys. They lost a lot of manpower, the injuries. Ewing missed time. Sprewell missed time. Camby missed a few games. And then you think about getting into that. It seemed like when they beat Miami, they just caught fire. They swept Atlanta. We kind of forgot that they kind of ran through the Atlanta Hawks in 4 easy games, including blowout wins for Knicks standards, blowout wins in games 3 and 4 to complete that sweep. They win game 1. Game 2, keep in mind, Patrick Ewing, if he makes that shot, they probably tie the game and go to overtime, but Ewing tears his Achilles on that very play, and he's out for the remainder of the series. A couple of guys who don't get enough credit for the job they were able to do in Patrick Ewing's plays. That was Chris Dudley and Cole Thomas, who had the task of having to slow down Rick Smith, who was a really good 7-footer who can shoot from the perimeter. It was very key in giving the Chicago Bulls fits the year before. That Knicks team, I mean, they were just a very resilient bunch. By the way, here's a trivia question. There were 3 events that took place on the same day in New York that particular date. You had Knicks Pacers Game 3, Mets Yankees Subway Series, and thereby, I think, maybe you can correct me with this. Wasn't the Belmont Stakes also ran on that day too?
The Belmont Stakes was ran on that day, and I believe there might have been a Triple Crown possibility on that day too. So,
yeah, so
it was considered one of the craziest days in New York history.
Yeah, and by the way, the El Duque glove flip to first base took place on that afternoon as well. And kind of linking the two teams, the two picks together, that Met-Yankee series in Yankee Stadium when the Mets got pretty much cremated, it led to half the Met coaching staff getting fired. But that actually turned the Met season around because there were 2 games under 500 when they left Yankee Stadium after losing 2 out of 3 in that Subway Series held in Yankee Stadium. But they were playing above 500 baseball and played their way back into the wild card chased by the All-Star break. In fact, they had the wild card for pretty much the summer of 1999 until, of course, the late season hiccup where they had to come from behind to win the wild card in Game 163. You think about the Knicks team that got to the finals in 1999. They had no chance against the Spurs. Without
No.
Patrick Ewing, Tim Duncan, David Robinson, they were at the top of their game, along with Sean Elliott, A.B. Johnson, Mario Elie, who was another key component to that team. And you know what? It was a great Cinderella run, but you know what? They just didn't have enough to overcome that Spurs team.
That was a 27-23 Knick team going into the playoffs, by the way, which is ridiculous seeing that. Also, fun fact, do you know how many games the Knicks scored over 100 points in their playoff run? Remember, there's 4 series here.
Less than 10.
Oh.
0?
It's 2.
No.
It's
2.
2. One game they scored 100, and another game they scored 101. That's it. They went to the finals and did not score more than 101 points in any of those games. If you do that now in the NBA, you're probably a 15-67 team. That just shows.
So you're basically the current Knicks.
Yes, minus everything else that made that Knick team good. Moving on to, more basketball. Finally, tonight, we talk about that Michael Jordan documentary that no one has ever heard about or ever mentioned or even compared to LeBron James, and they're The Last Dance. And spoiler alert, if you didn't see it, the Bulls won the title in their last dance. See? I said the name right there. See? It's all sinking in. However, we did find out some new things in the final two chapters. Number 1, pizza was the cause of MJ's flu game in 1997, and it wasn't Little Caesars. MJ literally was pissed off at someone for one season, was named a better player than him, Carmelo. And MJ truly believes that everyone on the team in the salary cap era would have signed a 1-year deal to run it back for championship number 7 in 1988-1999. I can't wait to unload into that one. Jay, your final thoughts on The Last Dance?
It's funny. I mean, as I said to you guys before we came on the air, I literally watched the end of it right before I jumped into our show. I kind of wanted to have it that fresh in my mind. There's a lot of things that kind of stand out for me. I had forgotten just how intense the playoff battles with Reggie Miller and the Pacers were, that year. And even to a certain, there were nights where the Pacers looked to be the better team by far. But no one had the will that could match Jordan. He just refused to let the Bulls lose. Reggie's own quote kind of stood out for me where he said, championship DNA and championship experience really rose to the forefront in Game 7 for Chicago. That's coming from a guy who was one hell of a competitor like Reggie was. The funny thing is that I did not know that while Jordan was doing his baseball sojourn, he had stopped by Chicago Stadium to, I guess, practice or, while in advance of the Bulls playing the Jazz during a regular season game, and he came across Brian Russell, and Russell was teasing him, man, why'd you retire? I wanted to guard you. I could guard you. You think Michael kind of filed that away for, when they were playing them in the finals, not long after? Here's the other thing. You talk about that. You talked about Karl Malone being named MVP, and Jordan was like, okay, you think he's the best player? All right. Like the man needed any motivation, and Malone actually had a decent series, but again, just not enough after him and Stockton, really. The 1998 finals game 3, 96-54, the Bulls at their ultimate defensive dominance, holding Utah to 21 of 70 from the floor, forcing 26 turnovers. The full starting 5 alone outscored the Jazz 66-54, led by Jordan's 24. And you talk about the ultimate, the push. And Jordan, of course, claiming, bullshit, I didn't push. He was going that way anyway. But, the best line to describe that was uttered by Bob Costas, who basically said, Jordan's hand on Russell's hip was kind of like a concierge taking a patron to his table, which, Costas was known for lines like that. I know you guys love the whole Rodman skipping out on practice to go do the whole the WWE wrestling thing. And Phil Jackson's quote was like that. He had a couple of good ones. Someone asked him if Dennis was, if it was distracting the team from the mission of winning the finals. And he goes, no, it's only distracting you guys. We're not distracted. Though him saying that Dennis brought fame and disreputation on all of us, we were dishonored in a practice. That was hilarious. I mean, and yeah, honestly, I did not know. I believed that Jordan had the flu because, when Marv Albert or Bob Costa says he's suffering from flu-like symptoms, COVID didn't exist back then, so what else would you think? To find out that it was actually a pizza? I mean, Michael, why'd you eat so much pizza that late at night? And it does beg the conspiracy theorist question. Did the pizzeria spike the pizza with something? You never know.
You know what?
And I'm going to tell you, and I agree that it will be known as the food poisoning game from now on. I mean, Rabbi, you touched on the whole whether or not they would have been able to run it back. And you got to wonder, if Reinsdorf had actually offered everyone, 1-year deals to try for number 7, would everybody have come back? Jordan believes it would have happened. Who knows? There's plenty of things that you hear from other people involved that just, they were so worn out from, finishing off this three-peat that they needed a break. They needed for it to just be over, starting with Phil. And my final takeaway, so look, do I think if they had come back, they could have? Maybe. If everyone had been able to gear back up for it, you never know. Is it fitting that it ended the way it did, the whole riding off into the sunset? Yeah, I think it is, and it's probably better that way. Even if Jordan is frustrated that he went out at what he still believed was his peak, and he said so, in late, near the end of the show. The other thing that stuck out for me, and I had forgotten about this because Jerry Krause is painted as the villain from the outset, and there's so much of quotes and one-liners and footage where you see the team heckling him and picking on him and insulting him, and Jordan. I mean, it's obvious, his feud with Pippen, and the fact that he and Phil Jackson did not get along. And we forget the fact, and Pippen gives him props near the end, and I kind of have to as well. Krause, if you think about it, he built both three-peat teams. He deserves the credit for that. And unfortunately, his lack of social grace is saying that even if Phil went 82-0, he won't be back before the season. Before that even started, is the most egregious gaffe. And Reinsdorf told him, and they talked about it, is you really shouldn't have said that. And I agree with Jordan. Why would you even say that, even if it was true? Does detract from the fact that he was one hell of a team builder. He built two separate, with a lot of different faces between the two different three-peat teams. There's a lot to take away from this. But you know what? And I kind of have to give Krause his due. As much as I think he was a jerk, and I think he, stirred that pot way too much because he felt he didn't get the credit he deserved and couldn't, just take the standard GM position of, whatever. He the fact that he didn't get the spotlight he felt he deserved kind of detracted from the fact that he did put these two teams together.
Well, first of all, two things. Number one, if 5 guys have to deliver one pizza, you probably don't want to eat it. And number two,
not at 3 o'clock in the morning either.
Yeah. And number two, someone should tell Michael Jordan, next time just pass on takeout, just go to Jordan. If you want pizza that badly. And spitting on your pizza.
There's not going to be a convenience store open at 3 a.m. in Salt Lake City. Come on, this is Utah.
Spitting on your pizza, really? How gross. But anyway, I look at it like this. My takeaway is that the Bulls team, the dynasty ended the way it should have, because you think about this, even though Michael Jordan said that he's frustrated they could have got one out of it, I think Father Time would eventually caught up to them. I mean, the same way it caught up to the Lakers, the Celtics, and the Pistons before them. You saw how Indiana pushed them to the limit in that conference final series, how Utah had golden opportunities to win that series. Eventually, so they were going to get beat. And maybe they would have been the proud champions and went on a shield, and maybe they lose in the finals eventually, kind of like the same way that those great Yankee teams in the 90s, they lost to the Diamondbacks in the World Series in the Game 7, kind of falling on the shield, I should say. But you look at it, it wasn't just Jordan. So Jerry Krause had issues with virtually everyone on that team. Every player had their own strife and beef with Jerry Krause. So I don't know if it's fair for Jordan to say that guys would have came back on a one-year deal when you just barely kind of crawled to the finish line to get that 6th championship, and it looked like everyone was kind of out of they were out of gas. So the tank was empty. And to come back and try to do it to get a 7th championship, you think about the team, the Indiana team that had emerged. You think about the Miami Heat team that was kind of the up and running next in line team. You had a young Milwaukee Bucks team with Cassell and Ray Allen and Glenn Victor Robinson that was kind of crawling up from the peak. The Knicks never went away, believe it or not. And then you had teams out west that were getting a lot better, like Portland, for example.
Portland, Utah.
Utah,
LA.
the Spurs, for example. So when I hear people say that the Bulls could have won 7, 8, 9 championships, that's kind of hypothetical thinking. We don't know if the Bulls would have beaten the Rockets. The Bulls teams, for good as they were, struggled against the Western Conference if it wasn't for the finals. We kind of forgot about they struggled playing against Western Conference teams despite the great gaudy records, Houston being one of those teams, because they had no way of slowing Hakeem Olajuwon down, and those teams were good in their equal right. It's just unfortunate that they not had a chance to play each other in the finals. Then you think about that really good Orlando Magic team that had Shaq stayed and had Penny stayed healthy. Who knows if that would have been the team to beat? You got to keep in mind, when the Bulls swept Orlando in '96, Horace Grant did not play the rest of the series. Shaq was banged up. Anthony Bowie was starting in the starting lineup for games 3 and 4 down in Orlando. That was a shell of the team that had knocked them out of the playoffs the previous year because of all the injuries that finally caught up to them, even though they won, 60 games as well. I think, like I said, the way the Bulls team ended and the fact that they were broken up almost immediately. Keep in mind, the very next year was a strike short in 1999 season that only had 50 games. So I definitely feel like Father Time would have really caught up to them at some point where you had to play so many back-to-back games to fit that 50-game schedule into that window to get the playoffs started on time after the lockout. The way it ended, I think it protected the mystique of the 1990 Bulls teams and the fact that a team didn't knock them off the mountaintop per se, the way you saw great teams in the past finally get knocked off. It was management that finally said, this team has run its course, it's time to rebuild. And I know a lot of Bulls fans kind of hate Jerry Krause's day for it, but then you look at it like this, the way it ended, like I said, it built into the legend that is Michael Jordan. What happens if he didn't retire for a year and a half? What happens if the Bulls did come back for one more postseason run? Could they have added a 7th championship? A lot of those things added to the mystique and the allure of surrounding Michael Jordan's career to this very day. And the way it ended, I think, really boosted it onto a pedestal in its own, where it's grown over time to where it's methodological levels at this point.
Rabbi, you'll remember when we first started, we did our first recap of these, and I was the one who laid into Krause and kind of blamed him for dismantling this team. And I said, had they been able to stay together, how many could they have won? And it took all 10 of these episodes for me to kind of come around to the other side of that and realize, and basically that's kind of, if you want to say that how this documentary kind of may have changed some minds or given people some things to think about, that those of us who lived through it at the time and only saw it at the surface level, new insight to this. I gained an invaluable amount of insight to where I'm now officially coming around to the other side to agree with you, Anthony, that it is they probably wouldn't have come back in the same form, and even if they had to some shape manner, probably would not have been the same type of contender. So it is better, even if Jerry Krause's comments don't may piss you off about the team, riding off into the sunset. I agree with you now, whereas at the beginning of this documentary, I didn't, that it is probably best that this team ended when it did, rode off on the high note, and I got to say, I agree with you. And Rabbi, you can take it from here. I don't think this team would be as legendary. This two bookended three-peat, teams would not be as legendary or as mythical had they not gone out the way they did.
Well, mention this right now. What do we think of the Warriors and the way their title ended in 2019? Do we think any less of them because they didn't win the title in 2019? We probably think a little less of them because they didn't win the title in 2016.
When they won
but
7.
I think all teams do have to fall on the sword eventually. I don't want to bash Michael Jordan here. I feel like we've kind of talked about Michael Jordan as an egomaniac, but only an egomaniac would think after he hit the game-winning shot in Game 6 to get him his 6th title. He's like, why don't we do this again next year? And again, the lockout-shortened season really would not have worked with what would have been a tremendously older team if everybody had run it back. And honestly, I think rebuilding might have been the right move for this organization and they've been pretty much rebuilding now for the last 20 plus years. But I think eventually you have to get to the next level. You had nobody who was going to be a true star of that team for the next 7-8 years. I know Scottie Pippen made it right back to a Western Conference Finals in 2000 with Portland, but you would not have any of those players be at the same level. Jordan might have been at the same level, but then again, you would not have had the same supporting cast. Look at MJ in Washington all those years later. Wasn't even close to the same player, never even played another playoff game again. One thing I want to take a huge objection to. Jordan said the Pacers were our greatest rival. They went to a 7-game series. That's amazing. They had a huge physical battle, and the Pacers were right in Game 7. It was nip and tuck, and I know David Aldridge said, the Pacers have to win this series. Like, no, they don't. And also, doesn't a series start when the road team wins a game? And guess how many games were won by the road team in that series? 0. Have some respect for the New York Knicks, who took you to 7 games in 1992, led 2-0 against you in 93. I know 96 and 98, they were focused more on the Pacers and the Heat, specifically in that 97 series. But I still think the Knicks were the Bulls' biggest rival. That's a little bit of homerism towards me, but I think the fact stated, Indiana was more of an up-and-coming team that didn't get there till 2000. But it was an amazing documentary. I think I have a little less respect for Michael Jordan as a human being after this documentary, because he's not the like Mike character that everybody thinks he is. He's truly and I'm sorry, straight family, for saying this, a huge asshole in a lot of senses. And I think we always make these comparisons between him and LeBron. We see a lot of LeBron, and LeBron is not the type of trash talker that MJ was, who kind of denigrated a lot of people. But again, he was the best player in the world and is still the best player.
Yeah, and as I said on the last show, Rabbi, I think that in order for him to lead that team, he had to be that type of asshole. I don't think he could have dragged the guys who were the Steve Kerrs, the Judd Bushlers, the Longley's, right along. I don't think he could have raised them up to a championship level team had he not driven them as hard as he could. Yes, it made him impossibly tough to like sometimes, but I would wager that he may not have been liked as much as LeBron is liked. But I tell you this, I don't doubt that every single one of those guys, even ones who could not really graded on him, they all respected him as a leader. And I don't think it detracts from Michael Jordan, the GOAT. It may detract from Michael Jordan, the human, but I don't think it detracts from Michael Jordan, the GOAT, in any shape, manner, or form.
Yeah, get back to what you said, Rabbi. The 1992 Knicks, keep in mind, the Bulls had beat them 9 straight games. and the Knicks winning the Chicago Stadium and kind of shocked them in game 1 of that series, and it kind of set the tone for what was a physically toned 7-game series. So I agree with you on that one. But also, I've been saying for years, Michael Jordan is arguably the greatest player of all time, but also a jerk. But you see me go back and forth with the Jordan fandoms of the world about this. And like I said, I'm old enough, obviously, to have watched all this take place in real time. And I think for a generation of younger Jordan fans to see this side of Jordan, to see all these things come from the surface, I think it kind of took away from some of the Jordan myths that was like kind of made up and fable. Like you looked at Jordan was being this way to his teammates. We kind of destroy people for bullying tactics in today's modern era, but because he's Michael Jordan, you know, he's looked at a certain way. We spent years putting him on a pedestal for that. So he kind of gets a slap on the wrist for things. We tear down athletes in today's day and age. Then also you talk about the issues with what happened with his father and the whole gambling thing, and that gave me a little more and it led to me for years. I always felt like he wanted to get away from the game. His father's death really just kind of pushed him to that point.
Oh, yeah.
And you saw it firsthand how close he was with his father. And it really took a lot out of him. And I have a lot, like I said, I always respected his decision to step away from the game because that was his personal choice. But the timing of when he did this, he did it 3 weeks before the start of the regular season. So it kind of left the Bulls in a tough bind as far as how do we replace Michael Jordan, and the Cubs are trying to go for a 4-peat. We tend to forget things like that. And I know people hammer LeBron James for quote-unquote quitting on teams, and the greatest player of all time called his retirement literally before training camp. Like that, I mean, that was an Andrew Luck situation before Andrew Luck did it. But like I said, one of the things I am happy about with this documentary is a very good documentary, and that it did kind of dispel a lot of the Jordan myths that was out there for years, that Jordan never played on minutes restriction. We found that out in the first 2 episodes. He was only playing 14 minutes after he came back from the broken foot. Some of the things that were out there for years with the Jordan Rules book and his relationship with his teammates. I think a lot of people didn't believe it. If you weren't around before 1995, I would say, you probably didn't believe these stories because you didn't think it was true.
Believe it now, though.
No,
yeah.
Sports was not a 24/7
no social media
news cycle like it is now. I mean, me and Jay talked about this. If you didn't find out on Sports Center at 11 o'clock local news, you found out about your team winning or losing in the morning papers the next day. You didn't see a lot of candid comments from athletes like we see on social media today. It gives me a lot of respect of how the Jordan and the Bulls handled the whole gambling situation during their postseason run, and how they were able to somehow play through it. Like, it gives me more respect for today's athletes. Whereas now they're always in the spotlight. Yeah. There's always social media. We live in a hot take sports environment, whereas it's reaction first and not getting the facts straight until secondary. So it gives me a lot of respect for Jordan as far as him being the greatest player of all time. Maybe not the greatest person of all time. I think that's another conversation for another time. But also, I think it gives me a better perspective for the LeBron James and the Kevin Durant's and the Steph Curry's of the world who use their platforms to speak out on social issues. Michael Jordan was widely criticized for not doing that, even though it was his personal choice. He didn't feel like he was in a good position to be outspoken on those situations, kind of like how Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell were before him. And those are the things I respected about him. It was not the most popular decision, but it was a decision that he made that was best for him at the end of the day. So I walk away from this documentary with a little more respect and admiration towards those Bulls teams as far as how they were able to compete year after year after year, in spite of some of the behind-the-scenes drama with front office, with Jerry Krause, Pippen's contract situation, which was a problem. The Rodman saga, and obviously running around with Hollywood Hogan on WCW Monday Night Show and Diamond's page was still chill between finals games. Like I said, it was a great documentary. And they announced that Tom Brady's getting his own 10-part documentary too, which should be a little more interesting. So like I said, I think it was a great documentary. I'm watching the replay now, so it's like,
It'll be on ESPN. It'll be on ESPN for all of time. But luckily, we're done with talking about The Last Dance. I loved it, but thank God. So that wraps it up after a very, very short Last Dance conversation. Anyway, happy Memorial Day to everyone who's out there, and hopefully we get through this quarantine. Stay safe out there and stay healthy. For Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, my name is Steven Rabinowitz. Social media time. Facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines is where you can see this show live. YouTube.com/OnTheSportsLines is where you can see the show the next day. And Jay?
And follow us on Twitter, where we're going to post the link so you can go watch this show at On The Sports Lines. That's ONTH Sports Lines.
Without the E. Anyway, next Thursday, we will have another list for you. It's still in question about what we're going to do. Put on your thinking caps, gentlemen. But anyway, enjoy the unofficial start of summer. Good night.
Good night, everyone.